September of 34, I watched them drag a girl no bigger than a fence post into the Broken Creek town square, her hands tied with baling wire. She was maybe 14, couldn't hear a lick on account of being born deaf, and the baker was hollering she'd stolen bread right off his counter. Crowd gathered like flies on a carcass, some laughing, most just staring with that dead-eyed look folks get when they're watching someone else's misery and feeling grateful it ain't theirs. The girl's eyes swept across every face, looking for one person who might speak up, might say, "Hold on now, let's think about this." I was 52 years old, minding my own business, had no call to get involved. But I stepped forward anyway, and that's when everything went to hell. By dawn the next day, I'd either be run out of town or dead. Though I reckon there's worse things than dying for telling one good lie. The baker's name was Hollis Kern, and he had the kind of face that looked like it had been carved from a dried-out turnip, all pinched up and sour. He was jabbing his finger at the girl, hollering loud enough that folks 3 streets over could probably hear him. "Thief! I seen her with my own eyes reaching behind the counter when I wasn't looking." The girl just stood there, wrists bound, staring at his moving mouth like she was trying to read his lips. Her dress was more patches than original fabric, hung on her like a flour sack. Couldn't have weighed more than 90 pounds soaking wet. Sheriff Moody had one hand on her shoulder, not rough exactly, but firm. He was a decent enough man when the Mackenzies weren't watching, which wasn't often. "Now, Hollis, you sure about this? Girl can't even speak for herself." "Don't need to speak to steal," Hollis spat in the dust. "Justice is justice, even for the deaf and dumb." I was standing by the hardware store, had come into town for fence staples and was fixing to head back to the ranch. Wasn't my business. Hadn't been anybody's business in 3 years. Not since Martha died and left me alone in that foreman's house with nothing but memories and whiskey to keep me company. But something about the way that girl's eyes moved across the crowd, desperate, searching, put me in mind of a calf I'd once pulled from barbed wire. Same look, same knowledge that nobody was coming to help. "Hold on now." The words were out of my mouth before my brain caught up. Every head swiveled toward me. Sheriff Moody's eyebrows went up. Hollis stopped mid-holler. I walked forward, slow, keeping my hands visible. 40-some-odd faces watching me like I'd just sprouted horns. "That bread she supposedly took, when was this?" Hollis puffed up. "Not more than an hour ago, Creedmoor." "Why?" "You calling me a liar?" "Just asking questions." I pulled out my pocket, found the crumpled receipt I'd gotten from Hollis's store 2 weeks back when I'd bought supplies, smoothed it out. "See, I bought bread from you this morning, gave it to the girl myself, told her to eat it somewhere quiet so folks wouldn't bother her." It was a lie, pure and simple, but it rolled off my tongue smooth as creek water. The sheriff took the receipt, squinted at it. The girl's eyes had locked onto mine, wide and uncomprehending but hopeful in a way that made my chest hurt. "This here's dated the 28th, Sheriff Moody said slowly. "Today's the 14th of September." The crowd shifted. Someone coughed. A woman in a faded blue dress whispered something to her neighbor. My mind raced. Must have grabbed the wrong receipt. Got a whole mess of 'em in my pocket from ranch supplies. I patted my vest, playing for time. Point is, I bought that bread for her. "She didn't steal nothing." Hollis's face went from turnip to beet. "That's a damn lie, Silas Creedmoor, and you know it." "You calling me a liar?" I let my voice drop low, the way I used to when breaking up fights between ranch hands. "In front of all these witnesses?" The thing about small towns during the Depression, a man's word was about all he had left. Question it publicly, and you'd started something that couldn't easy be unstated. Sheriff Moody looked between us, calculating. He was paid by the Mackenzies, same as me, and the Mackenzies didn't like complications. Finally, he sighed. "Silas, you willing to take responsibility for her? Sign papers saying she's in your custody?" My mouth had gotten me into this. Now it was about to get me into something worse. I looked at that girl, couldn't have been more than 14, 15 at most. Alone in the world, judging by her clothes and the way she flinched when anyone moved too quick. No family. No voice, literal or otherwise. I'll sign, I said. The crowd erupted, half of them shouting that I was a fool, the other half whispering about what kind of man takes in a young girl who can't even scream if something happens to her. Sheriff Moody cut through the noise. You understand what you're agreeing to, Creedmoor. Anything happens to her, any trouble she causes, it's on your head. I understand. He started to untie her wrists. That's when Virgil Mackenzie pushed through the crowd, his face twisted up meaner than I'd ever seen it, and I knew right then I'd just made the worst mistake of my life. The foreman's house sat a quarter-mile from the main ranch buildings, close enough to hear the dinner bell, but far enough for privacy. I'd lived there 17 years, first with Martha, then alone after the pneumonia took her. Walking up to it now with this girl trailing behind me felt like bringing home a stray dog, except a dog wouldn't get you ostracized from decent society. She stopped at the porch steps, uncertain. Go on, I said. Ain't much, but it's dry and there's a stove that works. Inside, dust motes hung in the afternoon light coming through the kitchen window. Dishes from 3 days back were still in the basin. I'd let things go since Martha died. Figured there wasn't much point in keeping house for just myself. The girl stood in the middle of the front room, turning slow, taking it all in. Her eyes landed on the chalkboard hanging by the pantry door, the one Martha used to write her shopping lists on. Something shifted in the girl's face. She crossed to it, picked up the chalk stub with fingers that trembled slightly, and wrote in careful letters, "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," I said, then remembered she couldn't hear me. I took the chalk, wrote below her words, "What's your name?" She hesitated, then wrote, "Clara." "Clara," I wrote back, "you can stay in the spare room." I pointed down the hall. She nodded, picked up the small bundle she'd been carrying, everything she owned in the world, likely, and disappeared into the back of the house. I stood there in my empty kitchen, wondering what in God's name I'd just done. The first few days passed quiet. Clara kept to herself mostly, moving through the house like a ghost. I'd find things done when I came in from work. Dishes washed, floors swept, my shirts mended where they'd come loose at the seams. She never asked for nothing, never expected nothing. Just did the work like she was trying to earn her keep. Mornings, I'd make coffee and eggs, set a plate for her at the table. She'd eat fast, eyes down, then wash both our dishes before I could stop her. Evenings, she'd sit by the lamp with that chalkboard, practicing letters. Her handwriting got steadier each day. One night I wrote, "You go to school before." She wrote back, 2 years, deaf school in Austin. Parents died, farm sold, no more money. That explained the careful way she formed her letters, the hunger in her eyes when she read the few books Martha had left behind. I wrote, "You can read my books if you want." Her smile was the first real one I'd seen from her. Small, quick, but genuine. The ranch hands noticed, of course. Second day, Elwood pulled me aside at the fence line. "Folks are talking, Silas. Folks always talk. This is different. Middle-aged man, teenage girl, living alone together." He spat tobacco juice. "Ain't natural, they're saying. She's got nowhere else to go. I ain't judging you, but you know how people are." Elwood glanced toward the main house where old man Mackenzie's office was. "Virgil's been asking questions. Says you made him look foolish in front of the whole town." That was the real problem. Not Clara herself, but the fact that I'd contradicted Virgil Mackenzie's nephew in public. The Mackenzies owned most of this county, the land, the businesses, half the people. You didn't embarrass them without consequences. "Let him ask," I said, but my gut was already tightening. Saturday evening, I was teaching Clara how to saddle a horse, figured she should know how to ride in case of emergency, when I saw them coming up the road. 7 men on horseback, moving slow and deliberate. Virgil was at the front, his face set hard. "Go inside," I told Clara, then remembered and pointed firmly toward the house. She read my expression, saw the riders, and ran. They reined up at the fence line, didn't dismount. That was intentional. Staying on horseback put them higher, made me have to look up. "Creedmoor." Virgil's voice was flat. "We need to talk about your situation." "Ain't no situation. Girl needed a place to stay. I provided it." "That so?" Virgil leaned forward in his saddle. "Funny thing, I checked with the county. There's no legal adoption papers filed. No guardianship. Far as the law's concerned, you got an unrelated minor female living in your house with no proper supervision. The other men sat silent, watching. I recognized most of them. Feed store owner, the blacksmith, a few ranch hands from neighboring properties. Not necessarily bad men, but men who did what the Mackenzies wanted. I'll file the papers come Monday, I said. Virgil smiled, and it didn't reach his eyes. Too late for that. Sheriff's gonna be here tomorrow morning with the county clerk. They're gonna remove that girl for her own protection. He paused. Unless you want to avoid all that trouble and send her on her way tonight. Behind me, I heard the front door creak open. Clara stood on the porch, that chalkboard clutched against her chest, watching us with those two old eyes. She ain't going nowhere, I said. Sunday morning came cold and gray, the kind of morning that makes a man's joints ache and his thoughts turn dark. I was at the stove frying eggs when I heard the horses, more than two, less than a dozen. Through the window, I counted 6 riders, Sheriff Moody at the front with a weasel-faced man in a suit I didn't recognize. Behind them, Virgil Mackenzie sat his horse like a king surveying his domain. Clara was already awake, sitting at the table with her chalkboard. She'd written, "They came for me?" I nodded, set down the spatula, wrote, "Stay inside, I'll handle it." She shook her head hard, wrote quickly, "No, I go, you keep job, keep house." Something in my chest cracked reading those words. This girl who had nothing was trying to protect me. I wrote, "You're not going anywhere." Sheriff Moody dismounted first, had the decency to look uncomfortable. The man in the suit stayed on his horse, consulting a leather-bound ledger. "Mr. Creedmoor, I'm James Pettigrew, county clerk. I'm here regarding the minor child residing on these premises." "She's got a name," I said. "Clara." Pettigrew didn't even look up from his ledger. "The minor in question has no legal guardian, no filed paperwork establishing custodial rights. State law requires she be remanded to county care for her own protection." Protection from what? A roof over her head? 3 meals a day? Protection from improper situations. Virgil's voice cut through the morning air. He dismounted now, stood with his thumbs hooked in his belt. "You're an unmarried man, Creedmoor. She's a young girl. People talk. Let them talk. Ain't that simple." Sheriff Moody stepped forward, and I saw something in his eyes. Not cruelty, but resignation. The look of a man doing something he knows is wrong because it's easier than doing what's right. "I got orders to take her. Legal orders." Behind me, the door opened. Clara stepped onto the porch despite what I'd told her. She'd put on the only dress she owned that wasn't patched to pieces, probably the one she'd worn to her parents' funeral. Her hair was braided neat. She held that chalkboard against her chest like a shield. The men stared at her. Some looked away quick, ashamed. Others kept staring with expressions I didn't care for. Virgil smiled. "There she is. Come on down, girl. Sheriff's gonna take you somewhere proper." Clara didn't move. Couldn't hear him, but she could read the situation plain enough. Her knuckles were white on the chalkboard. "She ain't going." I stepped between her and the men. "Not without a fight." "That a threat, Creedmoor?" Virgil's hand drifted toward his hip, where I knew he kept a revolver. "It's a fact." "Silas." Sheriff Moody's voice was tired. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. You got no legal standing here. Fight me on this. I'll have to arrest you for obstruction. Then she goes to county care anyway, and you lose your job, your house, everything." He was right. I knew he was right. Knew the whole system was rigged against men like me trying to do one decent thing in an indecent world. But before I could answer, Clara moved. She stepped around me, walked right up to Sheriff Moody, and thrust her chalkboard at him. On it, she'd written in big letters, "I want to stay with Mr. Creedmoor. He is a good man." The sheriff took the board, read it slow. Something shifted in his face. He looked at her, really looked at her, maybe for the first time. Saw a scared kid trying to be brave, not just some inconvenient problem that needed solving. "That's real touching," Virgil said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "But it don't change the law." "Actually," a woman's voice came from behind the group. "It might." Everyone turned. Ruth Mackenzie sat on a horse at the edge of my property, dressed in riding clothes, her hair pinned up proper. She'd never visited the foreman's house before. I'd worked for her family 17 years and maybe exchanged 50 words with her. She dismounted, walked forward with the kind of confidence that comes from being born into the family that owns everything in sight. Even Virgil straightened up when she approached. "Daddy sent me to observe the proceedings," Ruth said, which was obviously a lie, but nobody was going to call her on it. Wanted to make sure everything was handled legal and proper. Virgil's jaw tightened. "This ain't your concern, Ruth." "Oh, but it is," she smiled, sweet as poisoned honey. "See, I've been reading up on Texas guardianship law. Did you know that in cases involving deaf or disabled minors, the court can appoint a temporary guardian without prior paperwork if said guardian can demonstrate suitable character and means?" She looked at the county clerk. "Isn't that right, Mr. Pettigrew?" The clerk shifted in his saddle, consulting his ledger again. "Well, technically, and as Mr. Creedmoor is employed by my family, has been for nearly 2 decades, and has an impeccable work record, I'd say his character and means are well established." Ruth's voice had steel underneath the silk now. "Wouldn't you agree, Virgil?" The standoff broke when Virgil realized his own cousin had just sided against him in front of half a dozen witnesses. His face went through several shades of red before settling on a color somewhere between raw beef and sunset. "This ain't over," he said, mounting his horse with movements so sharp I thought he might snap the reins. He wheeled around and rode off without waiting for the others. Sheriff Moody looked relieved to have an excuse to leave. "I'll need to file a report with the county, Miss Mackenzie. Make sure everything's documented proper." "You do that, Sheriff." Ruth watched him go, then turned to me. "Mr. Creedmoor, might I have a word inside?" Clara had already retreated to the porch, watching this woman who'd just saved her with a mixture of awe and confusion. I nodded, led Ruth into the kitchen. She didn't sit, just stood by the window watching the last of the men disappear down the road. "That bought you maybe a week," she said quietly. "2 at most. I appreciate what you did out there. Don't thank me yet." She turned, and her eyes were harder than I'd expected. "My father's going to be furious when he finds out I interfered. Virgil will make sure of that. And when Daddy gets mad, people lose jobs." "Then why'd you do it?" Ruth was quiet for a moment. "Because I'm 35 years old, and I've spent every one of those years watching men in my family do whatever they please while women and children suffer for it. Maybe I'm tired of watching." She glanced toward the porch where Clara stood. "That girl out there, she reminds me of myself at that age, trapped, voiceless. And the difference is, nobody ever stood up for me." The next 3 days passed in an uneasy calm. I went to work, came home, tried to teach Clara what I could about ranch work and survival. She was a quick study, learned to read horse behavior, to mend fence, to tell good water from bad. Evenings we'd sit at the kitchen table and she'd write questions on that chalkboard while I answered them best I could. One night she wrote, "Why do they hate me?" I took a long time answering that one. Finally wrote, "They don't hate you. They hate being reminded that the world ain't fair." She stared at those words for a full minute, then wrote, "Is that enough reason?" "No." I wrote back, "It ain't." But on the 4th day, things started to change. It began with the dogs. Every ranch has dogs, working animals that know the rhythms of the place, know who belongs and who doesn't. Around mid-morning, every dog within a mile started barking at once. Not the lazy warning bark they give strangers, but the frantic sound they make when something's wrong. Elwood found me at the north pasture. "Silas, you better come quick. Trouble's brewing." We rode back toward the main house. A crowd had gathered in the yard, maybe 20 people, more arriving every minute. I recognized most of them: shopkeepers, ranch hands from neighboring properties, a few farmers from town. They weren't armed, not openly, but the mood was ugly. At the center stood Virgil and his father, Old Man Mackenzie himself. That's when I knew things had escalated beyond what Ruth could fix. Mackenzie was 70 if he was a day, but his voice could still carry across a valley. "Creedmoor, get out here!" I dismounted slowly, keeping my hands visible. Clara had seen the crowd from the foreman's house and was standing on the porch again, that damn chalkboard in her hands. "Mr. Mackenzie," I said, keeping my voice level. "What can I do for you? You can stop making a mockery of this ranch." His face was granite. "My daughter overstepped her authority. That girl goes to county care today, or you're finished here, both of you, off my property by sunset." The crowd murmured agreement. I saw faces I'd worked beside for years, men I'd shared meals with, all nodding along because it was easier than standing against the Mackenzies. "She's got nowhere else to go." "Not my problem. Not yours either. Not anymore." Mackenzie pulled a piece of paper from his coat. "This here's your termination, effective immediately. You got until dark to clear out." Behind me, I heard Clara's sharp intake of breath, the kind of sound a deaf person makes when they're trying not to cry but can't quite manage it. Ruth pushed through the crowd, her face flushed. "Daddy, you can't." "This is business, Ruth. Stay out of it." His voice was iron. "I've tolerated your interference long enough." The crowd pressed closer. Someone, I never saw who, threw a rock that hit the porch near Clara's feet. She flinched backward. That's when I saw the torches. Not lit yet, but 5 men at the back of the crowd held them ready, soaked in kerosene, waiting for the word. And old man Mackenzie was smiling. "Pack what you can carry," I told Clara, once we were back inside the house. "We got maybe 3 hours before they come back." She stood in the middle of the kitchen, that chalkboard pressed against her chest, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked like the child she actually was, small, scared, lost. I wrote, "We'll figure something out." She wrote back, her hand shaking, "Where will we go?" I didn't have an answer for that. 52 years old, no job, no references that wouldn't be poisoned by the Mackenzies, and $30 to my name. In 1934, that was enough to starve slow instead of fast. But I wrote, "Somewhere safe." She looked at those words for a long time. Then she did something that caught me completely off guard. She reached out and took my hand, just held it there between both of hers, her fingers small and calloused from work. Her eyes met mine, and I saw something in them I hadn't seen before. Not just gratitude, but trust. The kind of trust that said she believed me even when I didn't believe myself. I squeezed her hand once, then let go and turned away before she could see my face. We were packing what little we had when Elwood showed up at the back door, moving quick and quiet. "Don't got much time," he said, "but there's something you need to know." He laid out a piece of paper on the kitchen table, an old county record, yellowed with age. "Been doing some digging. That girl's parents, the Hendersons, they didn't just die of natural causes. Their farm was foreclosed, sure, but the bank that did it, owned by the Mackenzies, and the debt they couldn't pay, that was for seed that never arrived." Seed they'd already paid for. I stared at the document. "You're saying the Mackenzies swindled them?" "I'm saying the Hendersons died of starvation and despair because they got cheated out of everything they owned. And that girl's the only witness left who knows it happened." Elwood glanced toward where Clara was gathering her few possessions. "There's more. Old Texas law, still on the books from before statehood. If a man takes responsibility for an orphaned child whose parents were wronged, and if he can prove that wrong in front of a county judge, he's got legal standing for guardianship. It's called debt of conscience. Comes from the old Spanish customs. The Mackenzies own the county judge. They own Judge Morrison in this county, but Judge Patricia Holbrook in the next county over, she's got no love for the Mackenzies. Her family lost land to them same way the Hendersons did." Elwood tapped the paper. "This right here is your proof. You get in front of Judge Holbrook, you might have a chance." It was the first real hope I'd had in days. "How far to the county seat?" 40 miles. But you'd need to leave tonight, take the back roads, and pray they don't catch you first." Clara appeared in the doorway, her bundle of belongings clutched in one arm. She'd been watching our faces, trying to read what was happening. I took her chalkboard, wrote quickly, "We might have a way to make this legal. Make it so nobody can take you away." Her eyes went wide. She wrote, "How?" I wrote, "Trust me." But even as I wrote it, I heard the sound that made my blood run cold. horses coming fast, and the glow of torches reflecting off the kitchen window. "They're early," Elwood breathed. "Virgil must have—" The first torch hit the woodpile outside. The second landed on the porch roof. Within seconds, smoke was curling under the door. Clara's face went white. She couldn't hear the crackling flames, but she could see the orange glow spreading, could smell the smoke. She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in hard. I pulled her toward the back door, Elwood leading the way. Behind us, I could hear men shouting, Virgil's voice loudest. "Burn it down! Burn it all down! They ain't coming out! We'll smoke 'em out!" We burst into the yard. My horse was still saddled, thank God. I threw Clara up first, then mounted behind her. Elwood was already on his own horse. "Ride for the county line," Elwood shouted. "Don't stop for nothing." We kicked into a gallop just as the first rifle shot cracked the air. The bullet hit the fence post beside us, sending splinters flying. Clara buried her face against my chest, and I could feel her whole body trembling. Behind us, the foreman's house, the place I'd lived 17 years, the place where Martha had died, the place where I'd tried to build one small piece of decency in an indecent world, went up in flames that reached toward the night sky like the fingers of hell itself. And I knew, riding into that darkness with a terrified girl pressed against me and armed men giving chase, that we just crossed a line there was no coming back from. We rode hard for 2 hours, the horses lathered and blowing, before Elwood finally signaled to slow down. My shoulder ached from holding Clara steady in the saddle, and she'd gone from trembling to absolutely still, the kind of stillness that comes after terror burns itself out. "County line's just ahead," Elwood said, his voice rough. "They won't follow past it. Mackenzie's got no jurisdiction there." I looked back. No torches, no sounds of pursuit. Maybe we'd actually made it. We crossed into Brewster County as the moon reached its peak. The landscape didn't change, same scrub brush, same rocky soil, but something in me eased knowing we'd put that invisible line between us and the Mackenzies. "There's an old line shack about a mile north," Elwood said. "Ain't been used in years, but it's got a roof and walls. We can rest there till morning, then push on to the county seat." The shack was worse than he'd described. Half the roof had caved in, and something had been using it as a den, judging by the smell. But it was shelter, and right then, that was enough. I helped Clara down from the horse. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground. I steadied her, and she looked up at me with eyes that had seen too much in one night. I found her chalkboard still miraculously clutched in her hand, wrote, "You're safe now." She just nodded, but I could tell she didn't believe it. We'd been there maybe an hour, trying to rest, when we heard a single horse approaching. Elwood and I both reached for our weapons. He had a rifle, I had nothing but a hunting knife. "Silas Creedmoor?" a woman's voice called from the darkness. "Don't shoot. I'm alone." Ruth Mackenzie stepped into the moonlight filtering through the broken roof. Her riding dress was torn, her hair had come loose from its pins, and she had a nasty bruise forming on her left cheek. "Jesus, Ruth," I started. "My father hit me," she said flatly, dismounting. "When he found out I'd warned you they were coming early. Virgil wanted to wait till dawn like they'd said, but Daddy decided to move up the timeline. I tried to get word to you, but—" She touched her cheek gingerly. "He's never raised a hand to me before. 35 years. And I finally pushed him too far." "You shouldn't be here," Elwood said. "They'll think you helped us escape." "They already think that." Ruth pulled a leather satchel from her saddle. "So I figured I might as well make it true. This contains every piece of documentation I could grab from Daddy's office before I left. Ledgers showing the Henderson farm foreclosure, the unpaid seed orders, payments to county officials, everything." She looked at Clara. "Enough to prove your parents were swindled, and enough to show a pattern of the Mackenzies doing this to dozens of families over the years." I stared at her. "You're throwing away your whole life." "What life?" Ruth's laugh was bitter. "I'm an unmarried woman living in my father's house, keeping his books, watching him destroy people for profit while I pretend not to notice. That's not a life, Silas. That's just slow suffocation." She handed me the satchel. "Judge Holbrook's expecting you. I sent word ahead through channels my father doesn't know about. She'll hear your case tomorrow afternoon if you can get there by 3 o'clock. Clara had been watching Ruth's face, trying to read her lips. She wrote on her chalkboard, "Why help us?" Ruth read it, then took the chalk. Her handwriting was elegant, educated. "Because I was trapped too. Maybe helping you helps me find a way out." Something passed between them then. Two people who'd lived their whole lives being told they had no voice, no choice, no power. One deaf, one wealthy, different cages, but cages nonetheless. "There's more," Ruth said, turning back to me. "Virgil didn't just want to scare you off. He wanted you dead. I heard him talking to his men. Said it had to look like an accident. The fire got you both, tragic loss, nobody to blame." Her voice dropped. "My own cousin was planning murder, and my father would have let it happen." The weight of that settled over us like a shroud. "Judge Holbrook can protect you," Ruth continued. "She's got jurisdiction and she's got integrity. But you have to get there. You have to testify." "And what about you?" I asked. Ruth's smile was sad. "I'll figure something out. Maybe for the first time in my life, I'll figure out who I am when I'm not being a Mackenzie." That's when we heard it. Distant, but unmistakable. Dogs baying, tracking dogs. "They crossed the county line," Elwood breathed. "They ain't supposed to, but—" "My father doesn't care about supposed to," Ruth finished. "We need to move, now." We didn't make it to Judge Holbrook's courthouse by 3 o'clock. We didn't even make it to the county seat. The dogs caught our scent 2 miles from the Brewster County line. We heard them first, that deep baying that means they've got the trail and won't let go. Then we saw the torches again, maybe a dozen of them, spread out in a line behind us like the fires of hell made manifest. "They brought half the county," Elwood said, his voice tight. Ruth's horse stumbled, nearly threw her. The animal was done. We'd pushed them all too hard. My own mount was heaving, foam at its mouth. Clara clung to me, her fingers digging into my arm so hard I'd have bruises. "There!" Ruth pointed to a cluster of buildings ahead. "That's the Brewster County Sheriff's Station. If we can make it there." We kicked the horses into one final desperate gallop. Sheriff Tom Hendricks was on his porch when we came thundering up, 3 riders on blown horses with a mob behind them. He was a big man, maybe 40, with a face that had seen its share of trouble and decided it wasn't impressed. "Help you folks?" he drawled, not moving from his rocking chair. "Sanctuary!" I shouted, dismounting and helping Clara down. "We're being pursued illegally across county lines by me." Old man Mackenzie rode up at the head of the mob, Virgil beside him. 20 men at least. Some I recognized, some I didn't. All armed. "Sheriff Hendricks, I'm William Mackenzie. This man kidnapped a minor from my county." "That's a damned lie," I started, but Mackenzie talked over me. "And I have legal documentation demanding her return to proper custody. The girl's a ward of the state, and this man's been harboring her unlawfully." Sheriff Hendricks finally stood, moving slow and deliberate. "That's so. Let me see this documentation." Mackenzie produced papers. The sheriff read them careful, then looked at me. "You got anything to say about this?" "Those papers are falsified," Ruth said, stepping forward. "I'm Ruth Mackenzie, this man's daughter, and I can testify that—" "You're nothing but a hysterical woman who struck her own father," Mackenzie cut in, his voice pure venom. "Sheriff, my daughter's had a nervous episode. She needs medical care, not—" "I'm standing right here, perfectly lucid, calling you a liar and a murderer," Ruth shot back, her voice ringing clear across the yard. "And I have the documentation to prove it." She pulled the ledgers from her satchel, thrust them at Sheriff Hendricks. "Everything's there. The Henderson farm foreclosure, the fraudulent seed orders, the payments to officials. That girl's parents died because my family swindled them. Under the old Texas law of debt of conscience, Mr. Creedmoor has legal standing for guardianship if he can prove the wrong was done." Sheriff Hendricks took the ledgers, started flipping through them. His expression darkened with each page. "That's private property," Mackenzie snarled. "Stolen by a disturbed woman who doesn't know what she's doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," Ruth said. "For the first time in my life, I know exactly what I'm doing." The sheriff kept reading. The mob shifted, uncertain now. Some of the men in the back were looking at each other, whispering. The mood was changing. "There's more," Elwood spoke up. "That fire tonight, the one that burned Creedmoor's house, that wasn't no accident. I heard Virgil Mackenzie give the order himself. 'Burn it down,' he said. 'Smoke 'em out.'" "That's a lie," Virgil spat. "I heard it too," Ruth said. "My own cousin ordering arson and attempted murder." Sheriff Hendricks looked up from the ledgers. "This is a mess, a certified legal mess." He turned to Mackenzie. "Your papers say the girl's a ward of the state, but they're dated today, after this whole incident started. That's peculiar timing." "The law is the law," Mackenzie said. "And this here law," the sheriff tapped the ledgers, "says if a family was wronged by fraud, and that wrong resulted in their death, and an orphaned child remains, any man who takes responsibility for that child and brings proof of the wrong before a judge has legal standing for guardianship under the doctrine of debt of conscience. It's old law, Spanish law, but it's still on the books in Texas." The crowd murmured. Some of the men were lowering their torches now. "I'm calling for Judge Holbrook," Sheriff Hendricks announced. "She'll hear this case tomorrow morning, and until then, all of you," he gestured to the mob, "are trespassing in my county while armed. That's a felony. You got 10 minutes to clear out." Mackenzie's face went purple. "You can't." "I just did." The sheriff's hand rested on his gun. "And I got deputies inside who'll back me up. Your choice, Mackenzie. Leave peaceful or find out what Brewster County thinks of rich men who cross our borders with torches." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Virgil grabbed his father's bridle. "Come on, Daddy. We'll settle this legal tomorrow." As the mob slowly dispersed, Clara's hand found mine in the darkness. She was shaking, exhausted, terrified. But we'd made it through the night. The real test would come with the morning sun. Judge Patricia Holbrook's courtroom was a converted general store that still smelled faintly of tobacco and leather. She was a lean woman in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back severe and eyes that missed nothing. She'd been on the bench for 20 years, and the rumor was she'd never once ruled in favor of a Mackenzie. The room filled up fast. Seemed like half of Brewster County wanted to watch this showdown. Clara sat beside me at the defendant's table, Ruth on my other side. Across the aisle, Old Man Mackenzie had brought 3 lawyers from Austin, all in suits that cost more than I'd made in a year. "This court is now in session," Judge Holbrook announced, rapping her gavel once. "We're here to determine guardianship of the minor Clara Henderson and to examine allegations of fraud related to the foreclosure of the Henderson farm in 1932. She looked at me over her spectacles. "Mr. Creedmoor, you're claiming standing under the doctrine of debt of conscience?" "Yes, ma'am." "That's an old law. Most folks don't even know it exists." "Most folks don't need it," I said. "But when a child's parents get swindled to death and nobody else will stand up for what's right, sometimes old laws are the only justice left." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Holbrook's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "Present your evidence." Ruth stood, laid out the ledgers on the judge's bench. "These are my father's own records, Your Honor. They show the Henderson family ordered seed in March of 1932, paid in full, $340, which was everything they had. The seed never arrived. When they couldn't plant, they couldn't pay their mortgage. The bank foreclosed in August. They died that winter." One of Mackenzie's lawyers stood. "Your Honor, these documents were stolen." "These documents," Ruth cut him off, her voice steady as iron, "show a pattern spanning 15 years. The Hendersons weren't the first family my father destroyed, and they wouldn't have been the last." She pulled out more papers. "The Johnsons, the Carters, the Ramirez family, all the same pattern. Sell them goods they desperately need, take their money, never deliver, then foreclose when they can't pay." "That's slander," Mackenzie growled. "It's documented fact," Ruth shot back. "And I should know. I kept the books myself for 10 years before I understood what I was really recording." Judge Holbrook studied the ledgers in silence for what felt like an hour. Finally, she looked up. "Mr. Mackenzie, this paints a damning picture. You want to refute any of this?" "Those are private business records taken by a disturbed woman. I'm asking if the facts are wrong, not how they were obtained." Mackenzie's jaw worked. one of his lawyers whispered urgently in his ear. That's when Sheriff Hendricks stood up from the back of the courtroom. "Your Honor, I got one more piece of evidence. Came to light this morning." He walked forward, placed a small leather-bound journal on the bench. This belonged to Thomas Henderson, Clara's father. We found it in the county clerk's office where Henderson had filed it for safekeeping a week before he died. He knew something was wrong. He wrote it all down, every interaction with Mackenzie's people, every promise made and broken, every payment with no delivery. Judge Holbrook opened the journal, read several pages. Her expression grew darker with each one. "There's something else," Sheriff Hendricks continued. "The last entry, dated 2 days before Henderson died, names the man who came to collect the foreclosure papers." He paused. "It wasn't old man Mackenzie who handled it directly. It was Elwood Garrett." The courtroom exploded. I turned to look at Elwood, sitting 3 rows back, and saw his face drain of color. "That's a lie," Elwood stammered, standing. I was following orders." "You were the foreman of the Henderson property before Creedmoor," Sheriff Hendricks said. "You worked for Mackenzie then. And according to this journal, you're the one who told the Hendersons their seed was coming, kept telling them week after week until it was too late to plant anything else." He looked at me. "He's been feeding information to the Mackenzies this whole time, Silas. How do you think they always knew where you'd be?" My stomach dropped. Elwood, who'd helped me escape, who'd brought me the documents, who'd ridden with us through the night, had been working for Mackenzie all along. "I didn't mean for them to die," Elwood said, his voice breaking. I needed the job. Mackenzie said he'd fire me if I didn't. You let 2 people starve to death rather than lose a job?" Ruth's voice was disgusted. Judge Holbrook rapped her gavel hard. "Mr. Garrett, sit down before I have you arrested. We'll deal with your part in this shortly." She looked at Clara, who'd been watching all this with wide, frightened eyes. "Miss Henderson, I've read your father's journal. I've seen the evidence of fraud, and I've heard testimony about Mr. Creedmoor's character from several Brewster County citizens who vouch for him." She picked up her gavel. "Under the doctrine of debt of conscience, and given the clear evidence of wrongdoing that led to your parents' death, I'm granting Mr. Silas Creedmoor temporary guardianship to be made permanent in 6 months if all parties are amenable." The gavel fell. Clara grabbed my hand so tight I thought she might break bones. But Judge Holbrook wasn't done. "Mr. Mackenzie, I'm referring this case to the State Attorney General for investigation of fraud. And Mr. Garrett, you're under arrest as an accessory." As Sheriff Hendricks moved to take Elwood into custody, the man who'd pretended to be my friend looked at me with tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Silas, I truly am." I didn't answer. Couldn't find words that wouldn't choke me. Outside the courthouse, the morning sun was climbing higher, burning off the last of the night shadows. We stood on the courthouse steps, the 3 of us, me, Clara, and Ruth, blinking in the bright Texas sunshine like we'd just crawled out of a cave. People filed past, some nodding approval, others still muttering their disapproval. The Mackenzie name still carried weight, even in Brewster County. Clara's hand was still in mine. She hadn't let go since the judge's gavel fell. Ruth looked lost, like a woman who'd just burned down her entire life and was only now realizing she had nowhere to go. "I suppose I should find a hotel," she said quietly. "Figure out what comes next." "You could come with us," I heard myself say. "Least until you get your bearings." She looked at me, surprised. "I don't even know where you're going." "Neither do I admitted. "But seems like we're all in the same boat now, unmoored and drifting." Before Ruth could answer, a voice called out from across the street. "Creedmoor!" I turned, hand instinctively moving to where my gun would be if I still carried one. But the man approaching wasn't Virgil or any of Mackenzie's people. He was younger, maybe 30, wearing a railway surveyor's vest. "Name's Coleman," he said, extending his hand. "I work for the Texas Pacific Railway. Been surveying routes through this territory for 6 months now." I shook his hand warily. "What's that got to do with me?" "Heard what happened in there. Heard about the Mackenzies and their land schemes." He pulled out a map, unfolded it on the courthouse steps. "See, we've been trying to secure right-of-way through this whole region, But every time we negotiate with landowners, the Mackenzies swoop in, buy them out, then jack up the price on us tenfold. Ruth leaned in, studying the map. That's why Daddy wanted Clara gone. Not because of impropriety or scandal. What do you mean? I asked. The Henderson farm. It sat right in the path of the proposed railway line. If Clara inherited it, which she would have once she came of age, the railway could negotiate directly with her, cut out the Mackenzie middlemen entirely. Ruth's eyes widened. That's why he was so desperate to get her into county custody where he could control the property. Coleman nodded. We've been investigating the Mackenzies for months. What happened in that courtroom today, that evidence Miss Mackenzie provided, that's going to break their stranglehold on this whole region. He looked at me. And the Henderson property. Once Miss Clara comes of age, the railway would like to negotiate with her directly. Fair price, not the extortion the Mackenzies practice. She's 14, I said. She won't come of age for 4 more years. Then we'll wait 4 years. Coleman tipped his hat to Clara. In the meantime, the railway company has a policy of supporting communities along our routes. We're prepared to offer Mr. Creedmoor a position as a land agent, someone who can help us negotiate fairly with local farmers and ranchers, pays $60 a month plus housing. $60 a month, more than I'd made as a ranch foreman, enough to raise a girl properly, send her to school, maybe even that deaf school in Austin she'd mentioned. I looked at Clara. She'd been watching Coleman's lips, trying to follow the conversation. I took her chalkboard, wrote, "The railway wants to buy your parents' farm someday, when you're grown. Fair price? Your choice." She read it twice, then wrote, "What do you think?" I wrote, "I think your parents would want you to decide for yourself, but we got time." She nodded slowly, then wrote something that made my throat tight. "Do we have a home now?" I wrote, "Yes, we have a home." 6 months later, I stood in that same courthouse while Judge Holbrook made the guardianship permanent. Clara had grown 2 inches, learned to read at a 5th grade level, and could outride half the ranch hands in Brewster County. Ruth had taken a job keeping books for the railway company and was living in a small house in town, the first place she'd ever lived that wasn't owned by her father. The Mackenzies had been investigated by the state attorney general. Old man Mackenzie was awaiting trial. Virgil had disappeared. Rumors said he'd gone to California. Elwood was serving 2 years for his part in the Henderson deaths. After the hearing, Clara and I walked back to the small house the railway company had provided. She was writing on her chalkboard as we walked, which she did now whenever she was thinking hard about something. Finally, she showed me what she'd written. "Mr. Creedmoor, can I call you something else?" I took the chalk. "Like what?" She hesitated, then wrote one word. "Papa?" I stopped walking. Stood there in the middle of the dusty street with that chalkboard in my hands, and tears I wasn't ashamed of running down my face. 52 years old, and this was the first time anyone had ever called me that. I wrote, "I'd be honored." She smiled, that rare, genuine smile that still surprised me every time I saw it, and took my hand. We walked home together through the September sunshine, past people who nodded greetings instead of suspicion, toward a future I'd never imagined possible when I'd told that first lie in the Broken Creek town square all those months ago. Sometimes, I thought, the right lie told at the right time can lead to the truest thing you'll ever know. And sometimes grace finds you in the dust and the heat and the hardship of Depression-era Texas, wearing the face of a deaf girl who just needed one person to believe she was worth fighting for. Turns out, I'd needed that same thing. We'd saved each other. I'm sitting here on my porch, 78 years old come November, watching the sun sink down behind the hills, same as it's done every evening since God put this world together. Clara's land stretches out before me, her parents' farm that she got back, fair and square, when the railway paid what it was actually worth and not a penny less. She's got grandchildren now, Clara does. 3 of them, all under 10, and they come visit most Sundays. The youngest one, little Sarah, she's deaf like her grandmother was. But it's different now. In 1977, they got schools for deaf kids, got hearing aids that actually work, got a whole language built on hand signs that's recognized as proper and legitimate. Sarah ain't gonna grow up scared and voiceless like Clara did. Sometimes I think about that September morning in 1934, standing in the broken Creek town square with my mouth writing checks my conscience wasn't sure it could cash. I told a lie that day, bold-faced, looked that baker right in the eye and lied about buying bread I'd never purchased. Folks ask me sometimes if I regret it, if it bothers me starting the whole thing with a falsehood. And I tell them what I've come to understand over 40-some-odd years. Truth ain't always the same as facts. Sometimes the deeper truth is in what you're willing to risk when the facts are being used as weapons against somebody who can't defend themselves. See, I'd spent 52 years being a decent man, going to church on Sundays, working honest, keeping my word, following the rules. And where to get me? Alone in a house that echoed with ghosts, drinking myself toward an early grave, convinced the world had used me up and thrown me away. Then along came this girl who couldn't hear and couldn't speak for herself, and something in me that I thought was dead woke up long enough to say, not this time. This time, somebody's gonna stand up. Wasn't heroic. Wasn't noble, was probably just stupid if we're being honest, but it was the first thing in 3 years that made me feel like I was still a man, and not just a shell walking around waiting to die. Ruth Mackenzie. She's Ruth Coleman now, been married 41 years come spring. She tells people I saved Clara's life that day. But Clara and me, we know different. That girl saved mine just as sure as I saved hers, maybe more. Because here's what I learned in the dust and heat and fear of 1934. Dignity ain't something you're born with, and it ain't something somebody can give you. It's something you claim for yourself when you decide there's a line you won't cross and a thing you won't allow, even if standing firm costs you everything you got. Blood don't make family. I never had children with Martha, never thought I'd be anybody's father. But Clara called me Papa from that day in the courthouse until I'm sitting here today, and her children call me Grandpa Silas, and that's more family than most men get in a lifetime. The Mackenzies. Their empire crumbled like it was built on sand instead of stolen land and broken promises. Old man Mackenzie died in prison in 1940. Virgil disappeared, some say Mexico, some say he drank himself to death in California. Either way, their name ain't worth spit around these parts anymore. But here's the thing that haunts me sometimes. Keeps me up at night even now. Elwood. My friend who turned out to be feeding information to the Mackenzies the whole time. He did 2 years in prison, came out broken, died alone in a county home in 1952. I never forgave him, couldn't. But I understood him. He was scared, scared of losing his job, his security, his place in the world. So he went along with evil because it was easier than standing against it. And I think about how close I came to being him, how many times in my life I'd looked the other way, minded my own business, told myself it wasn't my problem. The only difference between me and Elwood was that one September morning, I happened to be standing in the right place when my conscience finally woke up. If you've ever stood at a crossroads wondering whether to get involved, wondering if one person can really make a difference when the whole system's designed to crush people like Clara under its heel, I can't promise you it'll work out. Can't promise you won't lose everything. Can't promise happy endings because life don't work that way. But I can promise you this. You'll know who you are when it's over. You'll look in the mirror and recognize the person looking back. And in a world that tries every day to make you forget you're human, that's worth something. That's worth everything. I'm grateful you listened to an old man ramble. If this story touched something in you, I'd like to know where you're from, what brought you here, and if you ever get the chance to tell one good lie in service of a greater truth, don't hesitate like I almost did. Some moments don't come twice.